Welcome to Eggs and Issues, a monthly business forum presented by the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce, bringing timely economic discussion to the region for nearly 40 years. Thank you to our sponsors and partners. Presenting sponsors, Martins Point Healthcare, Bernstein Scher, and Central Maine Power. Cooperating sponsors, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare and Bank of America. Reception sponsors, Clark Insurance, Key Bank, and Pretty Flaherty. Community Corner sponsor, Verrill Palmer. Tomorrow's leaders and entrepreneurs sponsors, AAA Northern New England and ProSearch. Coffee sponsor, Skowhegan Savings. Parking sponsor, Vitalius Real Estate Group. Media partners, radio sponsor, WGAN. Print sponsor, Maine Trust for Local News. TV sponsor, WMTW Maine CW. Business news sponsor, Maine Biz. Venue partner, University of Southern Maine. And thank you to our special community partners, Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, Kennebec Savings Bank, MEMIC, Spectrum Healthcare Partners, Southern Maine Community College, and the University of Southern Maine. And now, please welcome Portland Community Chamber President, Mary Costigan.
Welcome to Eggs and Issues, the monthly business breakfast event series of the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce. This is our first Eggs event of the 23-24 season, and we're so happy to be here at our new venue, Hannaford Hall at the University of Southern Maine. My name is Mary Costigan. I'm a shareholder at Bernstein Scher, and I'm honored to serve as the new volunteer president of the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce. Thank you to Britt Vitalius, wherever you are here, who served as the board's president for the past 2 years, and I will be looking forward to my role as the new president and your MC here for the next couple of years. I want to thank all of you for joining us today at Eggs and Issues. Today's presentation will focus on Pine Tree Power, which is the subject of question 3 on the November 7th ballot. It asks voters to approve a new power company governed by an elected board that would acquire and operate the existing electricity transmission and distribution facilities in Maine. Our guest speaker today is Jim Cohen. He's a partner at the Verrill Law Firm. He's working with Maine Affordable Energy Coalition, a ballot question committee formed to help educate Maine voters about the risks associated with Pine Tree Power. The Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce opposed Pine Tree Power when it was first introduced in the state legislature in 2019, and we remain opposed to the type of government-controlled power company on the ballot this November. Jim will give a brief presentation, and then I will play my favorite role of devil's advocate to better understand this complicated issue. Following my questions, you will all have the opportunity to ask Jim some questions as well. But before I invite Jim to the stage, I do want to take a moment to again recognize each of our sponsors of Eggs and Issues who make this event possible. First and foremost, our presenting sponsors, Martins Point Healthcare, Bernstein Scher, and Central Maine Power. Cooperating sponsors, Bank of America and Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. Reception sponsors, Clark Insurance, Key Bank, and Pretty Flaherty. Our Community Corner sponsor is Verrill Palmer. Today's Community Corner is an organization near and dear to my heart, the Maine Marathon. The Maine Marathon, Half Marathon, and Relay is a Maine Track Club event. The October 1st event will be the 32nd edition, making this one of the longest running marathon events in New England. Wrapping around Portland's Back Cove neighborhood and up the scenic Maine coast to Yarmouth, this out and back course is known for its rolling hills, peak fall foliage, and stunning views of Portland and the Atlantic Ocean. The Maine Marathon is proud to be a volunteer-fueled event which pays no salaries or wages, led by their fabulous director, Bob Dunphy, who I think is also here today. All revenues after expenses are donated to local charities. Maine Marathon is also a fantastic way for people to raise money for charity of their choice. The Run for a Cause bib helps nonprofits recruit people to run and raise money for their charity. Over $350,000 was raised in 2022. Over 4,000 runners from almost every state and 8 countries will come to Portland on October 1st for the race and contribute to the local economy. As a destination race, many runners also come to enjoy the many recreational opportunities and other attractions like restaurants, breweries, music, and landmarks, which Portland and Maine offers. In 2022, the event had more than $1.3 million economic impact on Maine. To learn more about the Maine Marathon, to register or race or volunteer, visit their website, mainemarathon.com. Tomorrow's leaders and entrepreneur sponsors are AAA Northern New England and ProSearch. Through this program, the Chamber can offer students in the region, both high school and college level, an invitation to attend Eggs and Issues at no cost. I believe we have a large contingent of students from Gorham High School, Casco Bay High School, as well as USM here today. If you are here from those schools, please stand and be recognized, and welcome to Eggs and Issues. Our coffee sponsor today is Skowhegan, and I have not yet gotten a signal that it's here, but trust me, I'll let you know. Our parking sponsor is Vitalius Real Estate Group, and to keep the joke rolling, even though Britt's not up here, you probably saw him parking your vehicles this morning. Now, when you all walked in, you probably saw the QR codes and a lot of people trying to help you with the parking situation here. If you haven't seen that already, here's the QR code. It's out in the hall. What happens here at this garage is it automatically reads your plate as you're leaving. There's no gate, so you don't wait while you're leaving. You kind of go out and it gets your plate and it sees who you are and it connects to the app. So if you haven't done so already, these QR codes are out in the lobby, and you can take the QR code and follow the instructions. The promo code for today to get free parking is EGGSPARK, all caps. And at each event, the parking is free, but we have to go through this process or else they're gonna take a picture of you when you leave if you're not in the app. And I don't know, Jackie, will they get a bill in the mail maybe? Yeah, so, all right. So special thank you to our media partners, Maine Trust for Local News, WGAN, WMTW Maine's CW, and Maine Biz. Production support is provided by Headlight Audio Visual. And a very special thank you to our special community partners who support all of our Chamber initiatives. Anthem, Kennebec Savings Bank, MEMIC, Spectrum Healthcare Partners, University of Southern Maine, and Southern Maine Community College. And finally, our generous venue sponsor, the University of Southern Maine. It's great to be in this beautiful venue today and throughout the upcoming season. I'd like to invite to the stage University of Southern Maine President, Dr. Jacqueline Edmondson, to say a few words.
It is wonderful to have you here with us this morning. You brought sunshine, and so I think that's a really terrific thing. So thank you. It's wonderful to welcome you and the Eggs and Issues events to the University of Southern Maine campus. For nearly 40 years, Eggs and Issues has been the premier regional business community networking event, and the University of Southern Maine has long been a proud participant in this dynamic gathering. I am excited for a new year of important conversations and connections that will bring together our business and community and education leaders along with our students. It's wonderful to see so many students here today, including those from Gorham who are my neighbors because I live in Gorham, so it's wonderful to have you here today. I do wish to thank Chamber President and CEO Quincy Hensel for her decision to bring us all together here in Abramson and Hannaford Hall. Thank you, Quincy. I also wish to thank Andy Osheroff, who I see in the back there. Andy is the director of USM's Career and Employment Hub and the entire Career Hub team. I want to thank them all for all they do to connect employers with students who can contribute their skills, ideas, and talents that help to lead local enterprise into the future. I would also like to thank Sherry Phillips and her conference services team, along with Connor Lipschus and his catering team, as well as our partners at Sodexo Catering for organizing such a successful event. The University of Southern Maine is beginning a new chapter that will be marked by academic excellence, a culture of inquiry, and a time of expanded horizons as we pursue a national reputation as a comprehensive university. Our university is a destination for students, faculty, and staff from across the country and around the world. In fact, our incoming class this year has students from over 32 states and 12 different countries, and we're really proud of that diversity that's part of our student body. Over the last month, as you can see across the street, we opened 2 sustainable state-of-the-art buildings, the McGoldrick Center for Career and Student Success and the Portland Commons, which is the first residence hall on the Portland campus. If you haven't had a chance to see the McGoldrick Center, I encourage you to take a look for yourself. You can walk across the street and explore, buy a cup of coffee at the Husky Brew, stop by our Career and Student Success Hub on the 2nd floor, and you can even pick up your own miniature Husky at the bookstore if you wish. The orange construction fencing that you saw as you drove here is the beginnings of the work on our $63 million Center for the Arts. We're really excited about that construction getting underway, and soon we will be announcing a 6-figure gift for our Gorham campus. We've marked many successes over the past year, and I'd like to share just a few points of pride with you. So in addition to completing the McGoldrick Center and the Portland Commons and the initial work on the Center for the Arts, we completed the public phase and the final year of the Great University Campaign. In that final year, we raised over $14 million toward the $46 million campaign goal. We're launching new academic programs that will help to shape our future, including undergraduate degree programs in special education, industrial engineering, occupational therapy, and supply chain management. We also have recently transformed the Lewiston-Auburn campus into a health education corridor where we'll be offering programs like nursing, occupational therapy, health sciences, and social and behavioral sciences. We successfully have recruited and hired talented faculty and staff from across the country and around the world, which I think is a testament to the fact that people want to come here to work and they want to be part of our community. We enjoy stronger collaborations across the University of Maine system, and our students continue to achieve wonderful things. I would keep you all here all day telling you about our students and their wonderful accomplishments, and I know that Quincy would probably pull the mic on me, so I have to stop. But if you want to hear more about that, feel free to stop me at some point, and I'll be glad to tell you more about our students and their accomplishments. And so I do want to thank you for being here. If we haven't already had the opportunity to meet, please introduce yourself. And I look forward to the event this morning and wish you a good day. Thank you.
Edmondson, that, am I back on? I don't know if I am. Okay. That McGoldrick Center is something special, so I highly recommend going to check it out. It's really quite beautiful. So let's just have another round of applause for each of our generous sponsors today. Now on to today's presentation, Pine Tree Power, Promises versus Reality. Please welcome to the stage from the Maine Affordable Energy Coalition, our presenter, Jim Cohen.
Good morning, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Perfect. Well, so glad that all of you could be here today. This is a very important topic. My name is Jim Cohen, and I am with the Maine Affordable Energy Coalition. The Maine Affordable Energy Coalition is a very diverse coalition. It's made up of large and small businesses. The Portland Chamber of Commerce, Regional Chamber of Commerce is a member, Maine State Chamber. But it also includes labor unions like the IBEW, like the AFL-CIO. So labor and business are together thinking that Pine Tree Power is a bad idea. Our coalition includes individuals from throughout Maine who have signed pledge cards pledging that they oppose Pine Tree Power. And so all of you are here today to learn about Pine Tree Power. I've been an energy lawyer for 32 years in the state, working with my law firm Verrill. I have several colleagues here today. But I've had the opportunity to work with consumer-owned electric utilities. I've worked with investor-owned electric utilities. I've worked with consumers. I've also been on the other side as a public servant, as both a city councilor and mayor here in Portland. And I also just finished up a tenure as past president of the Portland Community Chamber. Now that Mary is the new president, I guess I'm the wicked past president of the chamber. So on with the show. So hopefully this works. Perfect. Mary said earlier the question that was on the ballot. This is what we'll be voting on. What we'll be voting on is, do we want to create a new power company governed by an elected board to acquire and operate the existing for-profit electricity transmission and distribution facilities in Maine? Some of those words might not be familiar to you, but what it basically means is, should the state of Maine set up a quasi-governmental authority governed by elected politicians, mandated to take over Central Maine Power and Versant Power? That's the question that's before us. Governor Mills, 2 years ago, vetoed similar legislation in Augusta, and what she said is, this is a rosy solution to a complex problem. And she talked about years of delay. She talked about potentially inexperienced politicians in control of our power corporation. She called this one of the most significant issues that politicians in Augusta had ever voted on, and I would say the same thing, that this could be the most significant issue that we as Mainers have ever voted on when you consider billions of dollars, statewide, touching a service that affects our lives and is critical to everything we do. The electric system is complex. We have a storm coming in. Right now, the folks at Central Maine Power and Versant are out bringing crews in. They're calling in all their workers. They're preparing. I got an email yesterday about the storm, and we're going to rely on those people to keep our lights on. Inevitably, the power will go out, and they'll be out working day and night to restore that power, because that's what they do. Every system that is part of running a utility, whether it's billing or metering or customer service, is important. The accounting systems are important. We need that system to work. So what would question 3 really mean? Well, number one, it means a decade of legal process. It's not going to happen overnight. It means $13.5 billion in cost to us to buy out CMP and Versant. That's 2 times our state budget, annual state budget. It means hiring another for-profit grid operator. So look, just to make that clear to everybody, we will be getting rid of CMP and Versant, paying money to take them over, and then rehiring another for-profit company. That for-profit company will not be from Maine, most likely, could be a foreign entity, and even could be CMP and Versant all over again. It will place 100% of the financial risk on we, the people, as consumers, because we won't have shareholders anymore to take the risk. That risk will be 100% on us. It will set up an untenable regulatory structure with potentially unqualified politicians who change over with electoral cycles governing our grid. And it will raise our taxes as the price of power goes up, as income taxes that CMP and Versant pay go away. What would Pine Tree Power not mean? Many of you who walked in here may have walked through a gauntlet of people telling information and giving rosy promises about what Pine Tree Power would mean, and frankly telling a lot of half-truths and cherry-picked information and a lot of optimism. But hope and optimism isn't a plan. So we talk about reality versus promises. Pine Tree Power is not going to improve the quality of our service unless we pay for it. That's what a Public Utilities Commission study said 3 years ago. It won't happen for free. It won't lower our rates. There's nothing in the bill that says it has to lower our rates, and it won't lead to any better response to climate change. Just last week, our public advocate came out and said exactly those same 3 things, that there was nothing in the bill that guaranteed any of those things happening. How about getting rid of for-profit company? A lot of rhetoric out there. We don't want for-profit companies. Nothing in this bill gets rid of for-profit companies. It just changes them from the capital owner to the operator. We don't get rid of them. And what about all those small utilities in Maine? We'll talk about this in a minute, but they talk about how their rates are lower and that their service quality is better. But what they don't tell you is that the ones that actually look like what Pine Tree Power would look like, those rates are about the same and their service quality is worse. And they don't tell you about island utilities, which are consumer-owned, which have much worse service, and they have higher rates, because they don't want to tell you those facts. So you all get a little bit of an education in how our regulatory system works for regulating electricity, water, et cetera. And this has been part of what I do on a daily basis for a range of entities. But as a public utility, it's a natural monopoly. We want it to be a natural monopoly. We don't want 6 and 7 power lines running down our roads and have them clutter up our roads, have to pay for 6 times as many wires. We want one set of wires. We made that decision 110 years ago. It's a natural monopoly. It's the right answer. But because it's a monopoly, there's a regulatory bargain where we have a Public Utilities Commission appointed by the governor, confirmed by the legislature to regulate those utilities. Everything they do is regulated. Now, those files that are in that picture came from my office. That was a rate case I worked on many years ago. That's probably an understatement. It's a year of litigation if a utility wants to change its rates. They can't just wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to raise your rates. No, they have to go to the Public Utilities Commission. It's a court case with discovery and witnesses, briefs, everything. That's the regulatory system we have. They'll talk about how it's a guaranteed rate of return. No, the people who own the utilities take a risk. Sometimes they make money, sometimes they lose money. It's sort of like when you have as a municipal government official, we would set our tax rate for the year. Sometimes we'd be right. Actually, never would we be right. We'd always be wrong. The only question was, will we be right by a little bit, or wrong by a little bit, or a lot? And it's the same with utilities. And if a city or town doesn't earn the money that they expect through their taxes, they're on the hook for it. And the utilities are on the hook for it if they lose money. Last thing, last year, legislation was passed, put forward by Governor Mills. It had new requirements saying that the PUC would monitor 6 different performance criteria for our utilities. If they don't meet those criteria, they can be severely fined. And if they continue not to meet that criteria, they can actually lose their franchise and have to sell off their utilities. That's a very severe penalty. It's in law today. We don't need question 3 to give us more tools. We have those tools today. Now, how many of you in this room, and I won't be taking names, think that Central Maine Power and Versant Power make electricity? All right. We have a very smart room here in this important university, and in the students here with us today. That is correct. Central Maine Power and Versant Power are a wires company. They transmit the electricity, they deliver the electricity, but they don't make it. So you've probably heard all of us have paid our electric bills and we've seen them go up, but look where the increases have come from. Those yellow bars are the supply costs. CMP and Versant don't make that electricity, they don't sell that electricity, they just pass through the bill. So when you buy electricity, they collect the money and they pay it to somebody else and they don't keep it. So they don't earn any profit on that electricity. That's where those increases have come from. And it's been disappointing that supporters of Pine Tree Power have said, look at your electric bills and how much they've gone up. If you switch to Pine Tree Power, it will be better. But none of those increases in the yellow have anything to do with Pine Tree Power or CMP, and nothing will change. In fact, if you look at your electric bill, and this is the average residential customer here in CMP's territory, only 13% of your bill would even be affected by change to Pine Tree Power. 87% would stay the same. Now, I'll ask you another question. How many people in this room think that CMP or Versant earn a profit on the operations of their companies? Again, a very smart audience. The answer is correct. CMP and Versant do not earn a profit on operations. And so whether it's CMP or whether it's Pine Tree Power, it doesn't matter. Those operating costs will stay the same. The supply costs will stay the same. The only thing that changes is capital costs and income taxes. 13% of your bill would be affected. But this isn't about individuals. It's about a structure that we're going to be living with for decades to come. And when you vote on question 3, what we're paying attention to is that structure and that process. And that structure and process is risky, it's inexpensive, it's untested. This is a significant change, and if we're going to make that change, you need to be certain it's going to work because our system is complex and important and lives depend on it. You need to know, will it work? Promises don't cut it. Promises are not a plan. So let's first talk about that structure. On the upper right-hand corner is what we had today, what I talked about a minute ago. Public Utilities Commission regulates our utilities. Under Pine Tree Power, we take those two utilities, CMP and Versant, we combine them into one. That's in and of itself a feat. And then we create this new entity called Pine Tree Power, which is a quasi-governmental board, and it will be governed by a 13-member board. 7 of those members are elected. They'd have 150,000 constituents each. They are elected like any other politician. They would serve for a 6-year term, which is 3 times longer than a legislator. They could be paid up to $40,000, which is more than 2 times what a state legislator makes. And then what is their qualification? Well, they have to be 21 years of age, and they have to live in their district. That's it. And those 7 people, whoever they are, will in turn select 6 more board members. Now, the other side says, oh, they'll be qualified. It says so right in the bill. It says they'll be qualified. I'm the board chair of the Northern New England Passenger Rail Authority, and the governor nominated me to that position. And the legislature had a check. They had a chance to consider whether I was fit to serve. But those 7 board members have no check. They're politicians. They can select whoever they want. There's no check and balance on it. And the only thing that's in that bill is it says collectively they're supposed to have some skills. They're supposed to know something about utilities. But the way it's worded, if one member of those 6 had those skills and criteria, the other 5 wouldn't have to have any, and that condition would be satisfied. And now we're back to they have to hire a staff. It's a new bureaucratic agency. So that means the director, the assistant director, the lawyers, the consultants, and we pay for all of that in our rates. And they would hire that for-profit utility. So let's move along, and I guess the other thing I would say about that for-profit utility, this structure only exists in 2 instances in America. One is Long Island Power Authority, where they've had a terrible time with storm response. They've had a revolving door of lawyers and lobbyists going back and forth between the private sector and the public sector. Right now, the state of New York is trying to change their private grid operator, and they can't. And actually, their very first grid operator was a foreign company, and now it's a New Jersey company, which maybe for some is a foreign company as well. Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority is the other. Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority is bankrupt. Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority measures outages in months, not days, and not hours. And those are the 2 examples. So those small consumer-owned utilities in Maine, they're really good, but they have nothing to do with Pine Tree Power. I talked about 100% of the risk being on us. So right now, if CMP or Versant do a bad job, the Public Utilities Commission can fine them. And that's an important regulatory tool. But when we own the utility, we own the grid, there's nobody to fine. There's nobody to punish other than us. And so the punishment and the fines don't happen. And that's why a number of former PUC commissioners and chairs came out against Pine Tree Power. They said, this is not an effective model. We've seen it not work. The other thing they said they didn't like is underinvestment, because elected officials are afraid to invest, kind of like our roads and bridges. So we're solely responsible for those costs. And in an extreme, let's say there's a bankruptcy. That actually happened in Maine with Eastern Maine Electric Cooperative, which is in far down East Maine. It went bankrupt. If you remember the Seabrook Nuclear Power Plant, that was getting built in the 80s. Eastern Maine Electric Cooperative had 13,000 customers. They invested in Seabrook. The costs went up. They went bankrupt. But because they didn't have shareholders, all of the customers had to repay all of that debt over 20 years in surcharges. And so that's a risk. All of you remember what happened in Texas several years ago, where there were unexpected ice storms, and it was the consumer-owned utilities that had severe financial problems, not the investor-owned. And one of them actually went bankrupt, and that will also be the responsibility of the customers. This is a very busy timeline. How does this work? I talked about a structure and a process. I'll just say very quickly, and I think all of you may have a handout so you can look at it later on, but we'll be voting this November when we won't know the price. We won't know what it cost us. Then we'll, a year later, be hiring or electing a board, so we're a year down the road. Then in 2026, that's the first time we would be, 2025, we would be appointing those appointed board members, hiring the lawyers, hiring the consultants, and then the job of Pine Tree Power is not to decide should we or should we not take over CMP and Versant. The job is how do we take it over? It's mandated. So you vote yes in November, we're down the road, we will be taking them over. Now, there'll be litigation. Now, the optimists say, well, I'm sure they'll reach a deal. They're not going to reach a deal. When you're billions of dollars apart, there will be no deal, there will be litigation. In the early 90s, I represented 2 small water utilities that were taken over by government-created water districts. And those 2 small water utilities didn't challenge constitutionality, which they could have. They just challenged the value. Each one of those was in court for 3.5 years. Well, litigation has gotten longer, not shorter. Those are 2 small water companies. Now magnify that statewide, billions of dollars. 5 years is not unreasonable. In fact, our public advocate said last week, expect it to be 5 to 10 years. That's a very reasonable assumption. That Long Island Power Authority I mentioned earlier, they didn't have any litigation. It took them 13 years to take over. On average, it's 10 years. So in somewhere around 2030, we're going to finally know what CMP and Versant are worth. We think it's $13.5 billion, but a court is going to decide that. So in November of this year, we write a blank check. We're going to buy 2 companies that we don't know how much they're worth, and only in 2030 will we know what to fill in on that amount. I don't know about you. I rarely go into a car dealership and say, you know what, give me that nice-looking car over there. I'm sure it'll work. I have no idea how much it costs, and maybe in a few years you can tell me what it's worth. That's what we're being asked to do with Pine Tree Power. Then we got to hire that grid operator, which won't happen overnight. Any of you remember when Fairpoint took over for Verizon about 15 years ago? It didn't work so well to cut over from one company to another. And electric systems are very complex and the stakes are higher. What the Public Utilities Commission said 3 years ago is, we have no idea, we can't be certain that there will be somebody to actually take over the grid. There's a very small number of companies that do this, so that's a risk. But let's say we find somebody, they have to staff up, they have to hire the employees, they have to have all those systems. It's going to take a couple years. So we're a decade down the road from this November before we're even flipping the switch. Governor's Climate Action Plan, those are really important goals, come and go. In Boulder, Colorado, they tried this in 2010, and they spent 10 years litigating. They spent $28 million litigating. The ratepayers in Boulder paid, the taxpayers in Boulder paid for that. Eventually, they gave up. And the former mayor of Boulder said this was a mistake. The enemy was not who owns the grid. The enemy was climate change. Proponents say, if it's the government, we need to make sure that the government can borrow money for far less. It's only a few percentage. So it's not going to save us much money on the borrowing side for capital. But I'll just say quickly, and we'll talk about it more in a minute, it's going to raise your rates because we have to borrow $13.5 billion, and we have to pay that private grid operator. And again, this has never been done before. No state has ever taken over any electric utility. None of these utilities, these consumer-owned or statewide, none of them, other than 2, have a private grid operator. And of the since 2000, of the 63 instances where on the local level this has been tried, only 11 went through, 2 were reprivatized, and at the same time, there were 6 utilities that were privatized, including right here in Maine. So with that, I'll just say, decade of time, $13.5 billion, elected officials we don't know running the grid, a for-profit company we don't know operating it, and no guarantees that it will work. So thank you.
Sounds like lawyers might be busy for a little while if there's a yes.
I think you can count on that.
Yes. So I'm just going to ask a few questions, and then we will, I want to leave plenty of time for folks in the audience to ask some questions. So you ended talking a bit about the rates. The proponents, their key claim is that ratepayers will see their electricity rates decrease as the debt is repaid and the profits for the investor-owned utilities are taken out of consideration. Even the PUC's own independent economic report found this claim to be legitimate, and Pine Tree Power's economic report claims even more savings. Can you explain how you disagree with these reports and what have they gotten something wrong?
Yeah, what I said earlier, one of the things that our public advocate said last week is that there was nothing in question 3 that ensured there would be lower rates, and that is true. And when the Public Utilities Commission did an independent analysis directed by the legislature in 2020, what they said is there are many variables. Many variables go into deciding whether this will save us money or cost us money. And one of the big variables is how much does it cost to take over CMP and Versant? Now we say $13.5 billion, and one of the reasons we say that is because the takeover is likely to occur in 2030. The Public Utilities Commission said we think the takeover will occur in 2024. When you think about it, every year of time, there's more wires, more substations, more poles, more value, so the cost goes up. And we can talk more about the $13.5 billion, but let's park that for a minute. That's one variable. The other variable is that private grid operator, because you all passed the test saying that we know CMP and Versant aren't earning a profit on their operations, but that private grid operator does earn a management fee. That's a new fee. They said it would be $82 million in new costs if the takeover occurred in 2024. Escalate that number with time and inflation, and that's even more when we start out in 2030 or after. The final variable is what I call a shell game, and this is very clever. You know those big overhead lines? Well, they're regulated by the federal government as opposed to the state of Maine. And the costs for those lines are shared throughout the New England states. So in Maine, yeah, those are our transmission lines, but we only pay 10% of them, of the cost. And we pay 10% of the cost of those lines in other states in New England. But likewise, Massachusetts pays about 45% of the cost of our lines. So the clever shell game that supporters say is, why don't we take those overhead lines, charge for them as though the utility still owns them, the taxes that they pay are still being paid, and the borrowing rates that the utilities have are the same, which is higher. And that leads to billions of dollars in overcharges to the rest of New England. And so what the supporters say is, sure, the rest of New England is willing to pay those overcharges, and half of their savings comes from that shell game. So if you think the state of Massachusetts or any other New England state is going to say, we're happy to give a windfall to Maine and let them use it to lower our rates, I've got a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn. It's not going to happen. And so you combine those three things, and we think that rates go up. Even the study that the PUC did, and they didn't want to use the word cost. They came up with a word called dissavings, which is a term I've never heard before. There might be dissavings. They said there would definitely be dissavings during the transition period, definitely dissavings during the period of time of 10 years, and they acknowledged their figures could be wrong and the numbers could be higher. But Pine Tree Power goes way beyond that with numbers that are just flat out wrong.
Thank you. I want to ask a question about renewable energy, which I think is really important to a lot of folks. The proponents claim that the current utilities are standing in the way of decarbonizing the grid by not investing in enhanced grid capacity and stymieing the connection of clean energy generation projects to the grid. Is there reason to think that we might see more clean energy projects and a faster interconnection process if we move toward a consumer-owned utility?
So that's a very important question. It's also personally important to me. When I was mayor of Portland back in 2006, I was the first mayor to sign on to the U.S. Conference of Mayors Climate Action Plan. And a lot of my day-to-day work involves working with solar developers who are trying to interconnect with the grid. And so I'm actually typically on the other side of Central Maine Power on my day-to-day career. I just think that Pine Tree Power is a bad idea. The first thing, and again, you all passed the test, you know that CMP and Versant don't make electricity, and they don't sell electricity. So whether it's Pine Tree Power or anyone else, it won't affect who's actually producing electricity. That won't change. But what could change is, what about those wires that interconnect to the renewable developers? And what Pine Tree Power won't tell you is, you and I as consumers don't pay for those interconnection costs. The solar developer or the renewable energy developer pays for those costs. So it doesn't matter whether it's CMP or Pine Tree Power, somebody else pays for those costs. Now, we had a flood of new developers, many of them my clients, signing on to the grid in an unprecedented way. And CMP had to hire hundreds or 100 more engineers to handle it. It has gone slow. The Public Utilities Commission, which controls the process, has been spending a couple of years, it might be another year, just to figure out the rules. Those rules are in place, those challenges are in place regardless of who owns the grid. And I'll remind what the public advocate said last week. Nothing in the bill makes it assured that our utilities, that Pine Tree Power will be any greener. It's not in the bill at all. In fact, there is a risk that public officials underinvest. So let's look at the state of Nebraska, which has dozens of small consumer-owned on the regional and local level. They are a coal state. They're one of the dirtier states in the country because they are relying on coal. And their national trade association, the Rural Electrification Trade Association, was on TV this summer opposing the EPA's clean energy plant. And in Maine, Central Maine Power and Versant Power, they do the net energy billing, they do renewable energy contracts, but our consumer-owned utilities didn't want to do those, and they're not required to do those. So there is no reason to think that anything changes positively under question 3, and it's probably even more likely that the opposite could happen.
Thank you. You just mentioned it, and you mentioned it a little bit in your presentation, but there's quite a distinction between how Pine Tree Power describes the organization and the way your group does. They call it a nonprofit consumer-owned utility, and your group and others are calling it a government-controlled utility. Which is it?
It is a government-controlled utility, and I'll explain why. With a little bit of history, so you all get a history lesson as well. In 2019, a bill was brought forward to the legislature, the predecessor of what we're now looking at. And it proposed to set up an entity called the Maine Power Development Authority. And the legislature looked at it and said, this is very complex, this is too much for us to pass, we think we should study it. That's what resulted in the study we had. The study came back and said it may have costs, it may have savings, and we should study it further. So the legislature was poised to study it further. COVID hit, legislature shut down, never got studied. Fast forward to 2021, the legislature took it up again without ever doing that study, but this time the supporters had a new clever marketing name. They called it Pine Tree Power. They ditched Maine Power Development Authority, they called it Pine Tree Power, and the title of the bill said, a nonprofit consumer-owned power company. Except that it's not a nonprofit, it's not consumer-owned, and it's not a company, and the rest of the words of the bill are pretty clear about that. So this past spring, when our Secretary of State was coming up with the ballot question I showed you earlier, they sued the Secretary of State and said the word quasi-governmental that the Secretary had included shouldn't be there. And the law court looked at that and said, it is government, and they had 16 different reasons why it was a government entity. But they said, most people don't know what the term quasi-governmental means, and I won't quiz you on all of that, but they said that's misleading. It's confusing to voters because they don't understand the term. So even though it was accurate, they felt that it shouldn't be on the ballot question. But the words of the statute say it's a body politic and corporate, that it's a quasi-municipal entity governed by an elected board. Now, I don't know about you, but people who are generally elected are generally politicians, and the agencies that they run are generally forms of government, and so is Pine Tree Power.
Thank you. Okay, we're now going to open it up to you folks out there in the audience to ask Jim whatever questions you'd like. We really would appreciate it if it was a question and not a lengthy statement. We have Tommy here with a mic, and so if you want to raise your hand, and Eamon over here on this side. I see a hand back there in the middle. Oh, sorry, right there. I'll let you guys do it. Yes, thank you.
Hey, thank you so much. So I run a small art business out of my home. And when we deal with outages, it affects my ability to get orders out on time and impacts my customer service. Also, this summer I was in a car accident, had a big vet bill due at the same time, fell behind on my CMP bill, was served with a disconnection notice pretty quickly. And so I'm wondering what CMP's plan is to reduce outages and keep bills lower to help support small business owners like me.
Well, thank you so much for the question. And the first thing I want people to make sure they understand, we're not voting on individuals at Central Maine Power or Versant. We're not voting on management teams. We're voting on a structure. We're voting on question 3, which sets up a different type of structure. So we can certainly talk about Central Maine Power and what they're doing. One of the questions had to do with disconnection notices and being served with a disconnection notice. And many of you may have seen some ads talking about disconnection notices. But what you should understand is if somebody is struggling to pay their bill, largely because of those large supply increases that have occurred that have nothing to do with CMP and Versant, CMP needs to issue a disconnection notice. Why? Because if that customer is going to access social services, they have to have some proof that they need help with their bill. And so CMP has to issue a disconnection notice. And I've been disappointed that the campaign hasn't told facts like that. They've blamed CMP, they've blamed Versant. So one of the plans, working with the legislature, is an arrearage management plan and working in partnership with agencies of the state, helping customers pay. I don't know about you, I received many emails from our utilities talking about how we can help customers access services to pay. And I guess the last part of the question had to do with plans to improve service. Well, I also got an email today about the storm coming up, and I know that the utilities have to go out and line up people to respond to those storms. But what's interesting, I don't know how many of you remember the Christmas storm from last year? Well, power went out, and Central Maine Power restored power faster than was expected. And just last week, a public official came out and said, we don't think that Central Maine Power should be reimbursed for their costs. So their shareholders paid $53 million to restore power in only 4 days, rather than the expected 8 days. And the public official said, if they had only slow-walked it and restored power in 8 days rather than 4 days, that would have been okay, because it might have been a little cheaper, which is questionable. But Central Maine Power did the right thing to try to restore power quickly, which is exactly what we want. Whereas some public officials, some of whom could be running Pine Tree Power, said, we would rather you do it slowly because it might cost us a little less money. We don't know.
Next question.
Hey, Jim. Rachel Reed from Remax Shoreline. So my question is, what's in it for them? If all of this is the case, and I'm sorry if I'm ignorant, but what's in it for the people on the other side?
Just to when you say the other side, you mean?
Pine Tree Power.
So the question is, what's in it for people on the other side for Pine Tree Power? And that's a difficult question to ask. There are certainly supporters who are very passionate about wanting a change. Some of it is philosophical. They believe that we shouldn't have investor-owned companies, period. They believe that we shouldn't have entities that make profit, period. But if that was so important to the supporters of Pine Tree Power, what's not clear, and I can't answer this question, Why didn't they write a bill that actually did that? Because they wrote a bill that said there will still be a for-profit entity, and they wrote a bill that said that for-profit entity could be foreign, that for-profit entity could be Central Maine Power and Versant all over again. So people have different reasons, and then there's aspirational, there's hope. Maybe things will get better. But what they can't do is prove to us it will get better. They tell us cherry-picked information. I'll use an example. They say Maine has, they talk about the kind of service in Maine and whether it's good enough and how it compares to the rest of the country. But what they don't tell you is that the large consumer-owned utility in Maine, which does not have a private grid operator, by the way, has worse outage data than CMP or Versant. They won't tell you that. They won't tell you about the small island utilities that are consumer-owned that have worse performance data than CMP and Versant. They won't tell you, and they also won't tell you about Swans Island Electric Cooperative. Small island, used to be on its own, and they left being on their own and they joined the predecessor of Versant Power. And when they did that, their rates went down, their service quality went up, and the former general manager for that consumer-owned utility is ardently against Pine Tree Power. So there is some basic disagreements about facts, but I think if you look at the real facts and look at the promises versus the realities, Pine Tree Power is not going to improve things and very well make things much worse for us.
Thank you. Do we have another question?
My name is Rich Nowak. I'm from South Berwick, Maine. I'm a retired professional engineer. I was wondering if you could, I'm primarily interested because I see CMP as being terribly unreliable. And while I was just sitting here, I went to chooseenergy.com and looked at their listings. And CMP is pretty much dead last in reliability in the United States. So I was wondering if you could comment on that. And number two, I was hoping when I came to this meeting that there would be more of a discussion from both sides of the question. Unfortunately, it seems to be just against Pine Tree Power. So,
Well, thank you very much for the question. The first part of the question has to do with Central Maine Power and some discussion about its reliability as compared to others. Well, the first thing I would say is 87% of all outages that occur in Maine are caused by trees falling on wires. 82% of those trees are outside of the right-of-way that Central Maine Power and Versant own. So it doesn't matter whether it's CMP or Versant or Pine Tree Power or anyone else. There will still be trees, they will still ice over in the winter, they will still fall on lines, and to promise that we can somehow magically stop ice from falling on trees and trees falling on wires is just simply unrealistic. The second is, what Pine Tree Power supporters will say is that nationally, that consumer-owned utilities have better reliability than investor-owned ones. But that's not accurate because it's a half-truth. Yeah, it's true that those very small consumer-owned utilities like Kennebunk, like Madison. I used to work with Madison Electric Works. They were a former client of mine. They're very good and they have good service, but they're also very small. And yeah, they only have a few miles of territory. They have fewer trees. I heard the general manager of the Kennebunk Light and Power District say, we have 44 line miles and about 7 line workers, but if we had to staff up to serve all of York County, we couldn't do it the same way. But yet, those national statistics that are quoted leave out an important one, the large rural electric cooperatives, because nationally they have worse reliability, worse service than the investor-owned ones, but they won't tell you that. And so as a state, yes, Maine is the most heavily forested state in the nation, and trees tend to fall on wires a lot. And that won't change if you vote yes in November. We will still have trees. And if you look at the statistics, there is a direct correlation between trees and outage statistics. And yeah, Maine is hit hard by that. But you know who's hit even worse? Eastern Maine Electric Cooperative, the consumer-owned utility in down East Maine, is hit even worse. So why aren't other people here? Well, I'm pleased to be a guest here this evening, this morning, and pleased to provide information. But I think as Ms. Costigan said earlier, that the Chamber has long opposed Pine Tree Power. I know I've been unable to attend forums on the other side as well, and that's disappointed me, but that happens.
Yep, so I just want to expand on that a little bit. Many times in these eggs and issues, we'll have both sides of an issue, but that is when the Chamber takes a neutral position on an issue. This issue is important enough to the Chamber that they've come out in opposition to this issue, which is why we're providing our position on this issue to you today. So I think we have time for maybe one more question. I can't see, Tony.
I'm seeing it.
Oh, all done. Sorry, we don't. Thank you.
No, I think we have no more time for questions.
We're out of time. Sorry.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim. Did they shut me off? I'll just speak loudly. A sincere thank you to Jim for joining us this morning and for taking the time to speak with us today. Today's event has been recorded and will be available for replay on the Chamber's YouTube channel, which is accessible through our website. If you have additional questions about today's topics and how you can learn more, please reach out to Maine Affordable Energy Coalition. To stay apprised of future updates, we encourage everyone to sign up for the Chamber's advocacy and events newsletters by visiting our website, portlandregion.com. You can view a complete list of all of the Chamber's upcoming events on the Chamber's website. We look forward to seeing you throughout the season as we continue our monthly tradition of Eggs and Issues during the 23-24 season. We'll be in person all season at Hannaford Hall on the USM Portland campus, where we'll guarantee another full slate of great eggs, topics, and speakers. Be sure to join us next month, Wednesday, October 11th. We're having the mayoral debate here. We're going to have all 5 candidates for a robust discussion on the future of Portland. Be well, have a safe start to the fall season, and a great rest of your day. Thank you.